On this edition of Defense News Weekly, see a missile defense exercise in Israel, listen to military leaders testify before Congress, and we'll discuss the rising rate of aircraft incidents across the military. With in-depth interviews, up-close video, and leading analysis, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome to Defense News Weekly. I'm Jeff Martin. The Air Force has decided to roll back public outreach, including interviews and base visits, pending operational security training. According to a memo obtained by Defense News, a vast majority of media requests and public appearances now have to be cleared by the Pentagon until public affairs officers can be retrained. In a statement to Defense News, Brigadier General Ed Thomas, the head of Air Force Public Affairs, said that the service would work to complete the training in the coming weeks, and that it was vitally important for the public to understand what is being done with their tax dollars. Russia says they've successfully completed a flight test of the Kinzhal hypersonic missile, which Russian President Vladimir Putin has described as invincible. The video you're seeing shows a Russian MiG-31 fighter supposedly carrying the missile. The aircraft takes off and launches the missile before landing at the end of the video. Putin's speech last week announcing the existence of the missile has sparked fears of a new arms race, particularly for hypersonic weapons, which are difficult to intercept. One of the most interesting programs in the Navy right now is the program to create an unmanned tanker for use aboard carriers. The MQ-25 program has several competitors, including Lockheed Martin, General Atomics, and Boeing. Defense News recently obtained 2 photos of Boeing's bid, which is a new-build aircraft. The program is ongoing, and it's unknown when or if a winner will be announced. President Trump visited Marine Corps Air Station Miramar this week and addressed troops there. He was in California as part of a trip to inspect border wall prototypes and visit the state. During his remarks, Trump touched on a variety of subjects, including a long-debated proposal for a new military service devoted to space operations.
My new national strategy for space recognizes that space is a warfighting domain, just like the land, air, and sea. We may even have a space force. We'll develop another one. Space Force. We have the Air Force, we'll have the Space Force. We have the Army, the Navy. You know, I was saying it the other day because we're doing a tremendous amount of work in space. I said, maybe we need a new force. We'll call it the Space Force. And I was not really serious. And then I said, what a great idea. Maybe we'll have to do that.
Check out this video of a Rheinmetall active protection system defeating a rocket-propelled grenade being fired at it. The system works by basically deflecting the incoming RPG, so the force of the explosion is diverted. The video was shot at an event recently in Germany designed to demonstrate how the company's system could defend the U.S.'s armored vehicles. The Army is currently evaluating which type of active protection system would be best for its vehicles, particularly as anti-vehicle weapons improve. In the skies above Syria, there's a delicate dance underway as U.S. and Russian aircraft are in the air each day, often very close to one another. There have recently been several incidents, and while there is a conflict resolution communications line, the incidents have continued. So we asked U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff General David Goldfein what his thoughts were.
What I continue to look at is what are the trends relative to the professionalism of the Russian Air Force. And I do have on occasion some concerns over what we see operating over Syria. So that is why we have a line between us and our counterpart at the CAOC at Al Udeid to ensure that we do everything we can to minimize, a miscalculation.
It's a time-honored Washington tradition. The military budget is released, and then military leaders hit Capitol Hill to testify in the request and answer questions from lawmakers. The past weeks have been jam-packed, and even more are upcoming. Here's a look at some highlights so far.
How is it possible, with 6 months remaining in the year, for you to possibly spend the additional cap, the additional amount of money, the $80 billion you're getting, plus I think $71 billion in OCO spending? How is it possible to spend that money wisely, Mr. Norquist?
Be happy to answer that, Senator. So when you look at the increase, you'll find that the vast majority of that occurs in procurement and R&D, which are 2- and 3-year money. And so when you're talking about buying additional munitions, buying additional planes, buying additional ships, You have time to negotiate the prices with the contractors and make the awards.
We've seen quite extensive activity in Ukraine, but have you noticed that similar organizations in Russia are concentrated not just on Ukraine, but also the United States? Are you beginning to pick up indications of efforts that are directed against us directly?
Chairman, I'll say that I have. I've seen activity related to infrastructure, reconnaissance, et cetera, within the United States, and I'll leave it at that.
And General McDougall, what is your assessment of the Air Force's progress in modernizing the air tanker fleet? Is the current plan reasonable, or can they move faster?
I would like to have a reasonable answer with this, Chairman, and that is what I look at is the overall capacity. Modernizing is important because the backbone of that fleet is 61-plus years old. When I flew them as a young lieutenant, they were old. They're considerably older today because I'm no longer a young lieutenant. So modernizing faster would be an answer, but the budget realities and the realities of bringing on a new weapon system are what they are. So we've got to continue to look at how we maintain them, how we fund that maintenance, because that is also a part of attrition as I see it.
How do you respond to claims that modifying the current delivery system, such as the SLBM, to carry low-yield weapon decreases the nuclear threshold because adversaries might not be able to correctly identify a potential nuclear launch?
Sure, I'll take a stab. I mean, this gets into some pretty big questions about deterrence theory and all those sorts of things. But in general, what we're finding is that some of our adversaries are developing capabilities. And what you want in terms of that is to have sort of proportional responses so that it does have that deterrent effect that we're looking. And I think that's the theory behind the recommendations in the NPR.
As Russia continues to dominate foreign affairs discussions, one country that is slowly building up their defense structure is Sweden. Earlier this week, I talked with Defense News Associate Editor Aaron Mehta to find out what exactly Sweden is planning. So Aaron, one thing we hear a lot about with Sweden is Russia's right there. So walk me through a little bit of why it's important for Sweden to have this total defense concept and why the geography is so important for Sweden in all this.
Sure. So as you can look at the map, it's pretty clear Sweden it's a long country. It's got a lot of territory to defend. This is Stockholm. Right down here is Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is a Russian territory, essentially militarized city. Mm-hmm. They've kept it essentially as a way to have their fleet in the Baltic Sea ready to threaten any of the countries here. That's about 220 miles as the crow flies straight across.
That's got to worry Sweden a lot.
It worries Sweden a lot, and it's worried Sweden a lot for years. Now, Sweden is not a NATO member. It has always, along with Finland, not been a NATO member.
Walk me through a little bit. What's the dynamic there? Why not, and what does that mean for them and the rest of Europe?
So a lot of it comes down to territory. They're right here, and they looked at this as we need to really think about if we're going to align with NATO and be a threat to Russia or try to find a balance. Finland and Sweden ended up going with that balance. They didn't join NATO when the Baltic countries here, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, joined NATO after the USSR fell. They've maintained their independence. They feel politically that's very smart and something they believe in. Mm-hmm. The flip side of that is there's no Article 5 guarantee, the thing that says if you're a NATO member and you're attacked, other nations will come to your aid.
So what's that do for their diplomacy, where it's kind of a wait and see and hope everyone comes to their aid if something happens?
So it's really interesting. So this concept, this total defense concept, the idea is Sweden is laying out ways so that the entire country really would become militarized, mobilized, if they were invaded. This is something they used to have back in the Cold War. Finland kept theirs. Sweden essentially let their policy degrade after the Cold War. They're trying to spin it back up now. Part of that is the acknowledgement that, in their mind, if they were to be invaded by a great power, and they don't say Russia, but a great power.
Great power competition, something we've heard a lot of in
Exactly.
recent days.
It's a big thing for the U.S. too. They think it would take 3 months for allies to come and help them.
That's a long time in modern conflict.
That is a long time in modern conflict. They also say it would take about a week where the military is being mobilized and the population is essentially going to have to be on its own.
That's a bit terrifying if I'm a Swedish citizen. And that's a national policy?
That's a policy they're working towards. Now, I asked a couple of the members of the commission about that 1 week period. How did the public react to that when they came out with this report last December that kind of laid out the principles of this? And he said, look, Swedes, when they think something is a joke, they make fun of it. Nobody was making fun of this. People took this seriously. Mm-hmm. People remember the Cold War, and the realities are, if you're up here and the military is more based around here where it's just more people, you're going to be on your own in a conflict. They want to make it so that people can survive. That's part of this total defense concept. Getting shelters set up, getting bunkers set up, getting food stores set
Almost
up.
like a Red Dawn type setup within the entire country?
There's a little bit of that, yeah. And it's the idea of, hey, if we are being invaded, Sweden can't fight Russia on its own forever. That's the reality. They acknowledge that.
Well, we're going to back up just a second. This is something that I think we need to understand. Why would Russia want Sweden in any way, shape, or form? Why is Sweden important to Russia?
So it's a good question for all the countries are asking themselves.
Especially Finland, Norway, I mean,
Right.
all these.
Sweden has some mineral reserves. Sweden is certainly a wealthy country. But it's the whole thing with Russia right now, and when you talk to people who study this, they say this, it's about opportunity. Russia's not sitting there going, here's our plan to invade Sweden in 3 months. It's if something happens, and this is what happened in Ukraine, the politics were perfect, the situation was perfect, there was a new government that couldn't mobilize its military quickly, and Russia said, you know what, we have a base right there, we've got things, we've wanted this for a while, we're going in. The third worry is not that Russia is planning a massive invasion of all of Europe all at once.
They just want to be ready in case the right possible situation happens
in case
to them.
something happens.
And another question for you. So we have the Baltic Sea here. That's been an area of a lot of contention. There was rumors of a Russian submarine that the Swedes detected several years ago. Is that something that factors in as this territorial waters violations that we see?
Oh yeah, the Baltic is everything for this whole region. It's, for Russia, again, the Baltic countries here, as we call them, the Balts, those were Russian territories, right? They broke away, they joined NATO in what was seen as a move specifically to make sure they never go back under USSR control if the USSR was formed again. Part of, again, the reason Sweden and Finland have always been careful is that Russia is right there, and they're aware of that. It's a region that generally it's assumed if something was to kick off, it's going to be in this region, whether intentionally or not.
So Sweden just wants to be ready with all this.
Sweden wants to be ready. Sweden wants to be ready, and they want their people to be ready. And that's the thing that's different about this total defense concept. The idea is, hey, if you are a citizen in Sweden, you have to be ready to survive, to assist the military. If you work in the tech sector, they're talking to some of their tech sector companies to try to come up with ideas for how that's going to work. This is a whole, not just whole of government, but whole country approach.
That's got to be terrifying if you're a Swedish citizen of, oh my gosh, this is something I have to consider.
I think, again, it comes down a little bit to the reality of the situation. Sweden and Finland had these policies in the past. They were prepared during the Cold War for such a situation, the Red Dawn situation.
Exactly.
Right? And as the USSR fell, as things changed, as the U.S. and NATO posture to Russia changed, don't forget, NATO, really up through 2014, they had good relations with Russia. They were building this relationship. In the late 90s or 2000s, there was talk of Russia joining NATO. Right?
So it's crazy where we are right now.
It's amazing how the world has changed, and I think this is Sweden's reaction to it, saying, hey, we're going back to a Cold War posture because we're back to that in the world.
Wow, Aaron, thanks so much for explaining this. Fascinating.
Thanks, Jeff.
To keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Also be sure to add us on Apple News and other platforms for the latest updates. And coming up, take a look at a missile defense exercise in Israel and learn more about the rising rate of aircraft mishaps.
Today's program is provided in part by Raytheon, proud partner of FifthDomain.com, the sister site of Defense News, dedicated to all things cyber. Learn more at FifthDomain.com.
Missile defense is a cornerstone of Israel's defense force, and recently, Israel partnered with the U.S. military for an exercise to test that, known as Juniper Cobra.
It is the most important exercise for U.S. European Command this year. It is the biggest that U.S. European Command will execute this year.
Featuring thousands of U.S. and Israeli troops, Juniper Cobra is designed to simulate a ballistic missile attack against Israel.
And it's an opportunity for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines to build the relationship that's so vital to the interoperability and the integration of our capabilities. And we are privileged to be a part of this.
Some of the systems featured include U.S. Patriot units and most elements of the Israeli missile defense system, from short-range Iron Dome to medium-range David Sling, and the long-range Arrow system.
We are able to work not only tactfully, but logistically, in understanding how each other works and broadening our experiences together.
While in Israel, soldiers practice in placing Patriot batteries, as well as integrating them with both Israeli and American command and control systems.
We will practice very complex scenarios that are very relevant in this dynamic environment that we are part of that. It will be a multi-directional threat from south, north, east, all the directions this is the way to be ready and prepare ourselves to war and crisis.
In addition, the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, deployed on the USS Iwo Jima, took part in the exercise, but not in the missile defense portion. Instead, they simulated an amphibious landing as part of their deployment. In addition, both the U.S. Ambassador to Israel and the commander of U.S. European Command visited the exercise to observe, and the entire endeavor is done with one goal in mind: protecting Israel if the need ever arises.
I would like to take the opportunity to thank and appreciate Lieutenant General Clark, the JTFI commander, for his commitment and leadership, and responsible for the mission, stay next to us, with us, to defend the state of Israel. And I'm sure that once the orders comes, and if we will need, we will find our allies, our partners here, stand next to us, fighting shoulder to shoulder, to be part in our team to defend the state of Israel.
According to a Military Times investigation, aviation mishaps across the U.S. military have increased since the onset of sequestration. To understand why, Military Times Pentagon Bureau Chief Tara Kopp talked with Dan Grazier from the Project on Government Oversight.
Dan, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
So when you saw the numbers, particularly the spike in Class Cs, what really jumped out at you?
Well, the Class C mishaps, the first thought that I really had was a lot of those tend to be kind of experience-based issues. They're obviously the more minor mishaps, and a lot of those just come with time. The longer service members are around these pieces of equipment, the longer they're operating in them, the less frequently they're going to make the more minor mistakes than you would see in the Class B and Class A mishaps.
With the Class Cs, you know, some of the airframes, what surprised us as we looked at the data, the Class Cs were rising even as the hours that each of these aircraft were flying dropped by the thousands. So do you think that that's a deep bench problem? Is that a resources problem? Is it because the planes have just been out there operationally for the last decade? What do you think?
So I would say that there's actually a connection between the two. So I would think that as the hours go up, actually the Class C mishaps should go down, because that means that the pilots are having more experience on those aircraft. So again, Class C mishaps a lot of times tend to be more experience-based than the big catastrophic ones that come as a result of mechanical issues. They usually result in the Class A and Class B mishaps.
With the Class Cs, is there potential that these become Class As when this is not addressed?
Well, it definitely could. If you know, a Class A mishap, the really serious ones tend not to have one single cause. It tends to be a series of causes, a series of seemingly minor things that line up in a certain way that cause for a major event. Now, sometimes particularly in aviation, an experienced pilot can recognize some of these issues as they're lining up and take corrective action before they become a Class A mishap. So again, it's important that we have very experienced personnel that can devote as much time as they possibly can to actually operating on their systems and gaining that experience, so they can prevent the more minor mishaps that could potentially lead to a more catastrophic event.
When we spoke earlier, you had mentioned a story of a helicopter pilot that you knew where it could have been a Class C but became something much worse. Do you mind sharing that story with us?
Sure. That one was a very unfortunate incident that really shouldn't have been an incident at all. This happened in 2009, and it was just a case where a maintenance hatch or maintenance cover was left open on a helicopter. And it was not caught before they took off, and in mid-flight that access panel detached and it smashed into the rear rotor of the helicopter, and the helicopter crashed. So had that maintenance panel been closed properly, then we would never have heard anything about the whole thing. No, but again, that's one of those things that there were a number of factors that probably led into that. That was what the investigation showed, and some of that had to do with experience. Some of it had to do with just the time of the day, and just a number of people kind of overlooked one minor thing that led to one big catastrophic event, unfortunately.
Based on your previous military experience, what do you think DoD should really be focusing on right now as they go up to the Hill for this budget cycle? Is it money that will make this whole? What do you think should happen?
Well, so the big talking point for the service chiefs and for the defense industry is always more money. They seem to think that more money will solve all their problems. I have my doubts about that. I think that the big focus should be on let's try to strip away some of the excess requirements that we place on the service members. So it's very difficult being a service member, particularly being a leader in the service, having to balance all the interests and to accomplish all the tasks that are placed upon you as you're trying to train your unit. And I think if we can eliminate all some of those requirements, and I'm not just talking about the big ones like the deployments. Those are obviously place great demands on people's times, but just some of the administrative duties that the units have to focus on, and allow them to focus more attention and focus more time on doing their actual jobs. I think that would contribute greatly to solving some of these problems, and it frankly does not involve more money.
Well, Dan, thank you very much for joining us today and offering your insights.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks.
Coming up, hear from the first female Army Rangers at an event in Washington. On this week's Money Minute, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack offers her tips on picking the right travel credit card.
Everyone loves a great travel credit card. They earn you points toward airfare, hotels, and everyone's favorite, cash. But they're not all the same, so whether you're vacationing overseas or you're booking a quick weekender, make sure your card rewards you for your travel efforts. You may think hotel or airline cards are where it's at, and they can be, especially if you frequently stay or fly with them. But if you want more variety in your perks and flexibility in your travel choices, look for a card that earns you rewards toward any travel expense and the purchases you make. A card that'll rack up rewards quickly and easily, so you can reap the benefits. You can also look for a card that has a hefty sign-up bonus or promotion. Good sign-up bonuses can sometimes translate to a free round-trip flight. That makes applying for it really worth your time. Finally, before you start globetrotting, know your card's fee structure. If you're an international traveler, choose a card that doesn't charge foreign transaction fees. You shouldn't be penalized for the very thing your travel card was designed for. Then book your trip, shop, dine, and see the rewards the world has in store for you.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more defense news coverage, be sure to visit our website at defensenews.com and subscribe to our Early Bird Brief, delivered to your inbox every weekday morning to get you ready to start the day. And coming up, hear from the first female Army Rangers at an event in Washington. The Women's Army Corps Foundation was established in 1969 to collect uniforms and other memorabilia documenting women's burgeoning role in the service. As that role has continued to evolve, so has the organization and its mission, leading to the organization that we know today as the Army Women's Foundation. They recently hosted a pair of events on Capitol Hill to continue that mission. Dustin Diaz attended their 10th annual summit and brings us the story.
This is a room of pretty exceptional people. Frankly, I think the Army Women's Foundation, when we look at so many women from the class of 80, which was the first graduating class of women from West Point, those are some strong women that really paved the way for so many of us that came afterward. They're a pretty impressive group of ladies.
Collins, a former soldier and Paralympian, spoke at the summit with one of those influential cadets, Pat Locke, the first African-American woman to graduate from West Point. The two were part of a roundtable of trailblazers and leaders that also included Captains Kristen Griest and Shay Haver, the first women Army Rangers.
I love talking about the first, but I'm ready to start talking about the 100th or the 1000th person. We want women to be bigger and better, not just contributors, but leaders in our nation.
Following the summit, the foundation inducted a group of new members into its Hall of Fame, including the new Rangers.
I wanted to go infantry really since I was a kid, before I really knew what it even was. I really started to accept the fact that, Ranger School and infantry was never going to open up. And I know there's so many people in this room that had to accept that fact. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate what you all did before us. I'm sure there's things that you all went through that no one will ever know about, and the struggle that you guys went through. And we could not be more appreciative for the sacrifices you made, because we would not be here today if it wasn't for you guys.
Locke said while she is retired from the Army, she's continued to serve as a spouse and volunteer, and she was glad to reconnect with past and present soldiers at the summit.
And these type of events allow us to reconnect with each other, to broaden our network. So many things have been given to us. We have to remember to continually give back in a very effective way.
Dustin Diaz, Defense News Weekly.
That's all we have time for this week, but if you want to see and read more, be sure to head over to defensenews.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.